order to prepare this model for rendering, there's not that much I have to do. There's no gem set in the shank or anything like that. It's purely this halo. So I am going to do a bit of housework. I'm going to select my dimensions layer, select everything on that layer and delete those. We've got a couple of curves here I don't need, so I can delete. Now we've still got a lot of history enabled on this model. So for example, this claw here, if I sell children, yeah, you can see everything else is also being selected. I'm going to sub-select the face of this. And I'm also going to come down to my gumball options here, right click on this, and I'm going to align this to the object. And that way I can move this handle down, and that's going to move it in the right orientation. I'm going to do a fillet edge, and I need less than half of the diameter of the claw. So the diameter was 0.9, so I'm going to need less than 0.45. I'll go with 0.4. Select that edge there, right click, and right click again, and everything else is updated there. Now I don't think I've got history on these center claws, so I'm just going to delete those four. I'm going to again sub-select this face here, bring this down, fillet that edge, and then I'm going to do a quad mirror. And then with all of these selected, I'm going to run a cage edit. I'm going to use a bounding box with the world coordinate system, and the Z point count I'm going to change to 6 control points. Right click again. Select that top row of control points, that's that top layer, and holding down shift, I'm just going to scale this in, and that's going to bend those claws over. I'm going to select the top layer and the second layer, and just do that a little bit more again. Once I've done that, I can delete that cage. Now I've got these additional claws here, which Rhino's reinserted them back in because we've got history enabled from our parent claw. But with those gone, then I can start working on these 4 claws here. So I can just trim these off with a line. So straight line, somewhere around here. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete all of the other ones that we're not working on. That way that's just going to make that a little bit easier, and then we can rearray those. So let me just select all of those. So I've got the 4 claws there. I'm going to use a wire cut and use that line that we've created. And then the fillet edge on those 4 edges. Now because these are on a bit of an angle, it's going to change our fillet radius. So if I right click, we're going to have a failing here. I've just pressed escape to get out of that, and you can see I've got some weird artifacts going on here. So Control Z to undo that. Let me go back to my working viewport, and I'm going to run the fillet edge command again, this time with a smaller radius of 0.35. Now I can choose the previous edge selection. So if I just click on this, you can see our 4 edges there have been selected. Now if I do that again, you can see that 3 of them have worked, but not the 4th. We've got an incomplete surface there. Let me rerun that again with a 0.3 radius. And we've got nicely rounded ends there. I'm going to delete my claws, and I'll show you a slightly different approach. I'm going to use the line that we used to cut the trims of the claws off. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag this so we've got a plane. I'm just going to move this plane down to about the girdle, the outside girdle of those stones. And then I'm going to select my 4 curves. I'm going to split with this plane. Then I can delete away the 4 tips of the claws. I can also delete that plane. Now I'm going to repipe these curves. This time I'm going to use the cap equals round option. Now the diameter is 0.9, and you can see that that has created those nice rounded end caps. I can also turn on my control points and select those tips there. I am going to right click on my gumball options and again align that back to C-plane. With those tip control points selected, I can scale those in. Just going to do a 2D scale from the world origin and just bring those in, and that way you can make micro adjustments on the fly there with those. I'm going to select those 3. I'll select those 4. Change the layer. Now these 3 here on the quarter, I'm going to quad mirror. And this top one here, I'm going to mirror across the x-axis. So now I've got all of those back in place. One thing I'd like to do as well is just bring in the width of the shank. At the moment we've got it modeled at 2.35 millimeters wide. I know that finished we're aiming for 2.2 millimeters. This is a nice, quick and easy way of making the render more accurate, more accurately represent how the final object's going to look. So let's bring in a ground plane. I've got this in my assets folder. I'm just going to drag and drop this. I'm going to import and then just move that up so it's in place. And now we're pretty much ready to go. All of my materials have been assigned on a per layer basis. You can see these here. So let me do a quick test render and we'll see how this is looking. Okay, that's looking pretty fine to me. You will notice we've got a sort of like a grey smudging on the side of the shank here. This is caused when you've got 2 surfaces occupying the same space. So we've got this surface here from the bridge, as well as this surface here from the side of the shank. Because they're occupying the same space, V-Ray isn't quite sure on how to interpret these and render those. So if you've got those, if you've got this issue here, you can often have this result here. You've kind of got this grey smudge. A little bit hard to tell there. Some angles show it better. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale in the bridge 0.999, so a very minuscule amount. Then when we render this, we're not going to have that issue of the 2 planes sharing the same space, and it's going to render correctly. But one thing I'd like to do is change the center gem to a sapphire. If I drag and drop a sapphire onto this, and then re-render, you can see we don't have a sapphire in the middle. And what's happening is because this is a block instance, which is the same as all these other gems, we have one material applied to all block instances. So I'm going to explode the center gem here, and I'll drag and drop our sapphire material onto that again, and we'll run our test render. And you can see now I've got that correct blue. So all of this means that we are happy with our ground plane, with our metal, and our color of our gems. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this as a render file. I can render these out individually, or I can make use of V-Ray's batch render feature. I'm going to use the batch render panel here. Because I've just saved this, I can either use this button here to bring in my last saved file, or I can use this folder to navigate to the file that I want. I can then uncheck the top 4 angles, which are going to be the default angles which come with Rhino. I'm also going to uncheck the animation, and I'm left with the 4 named views that we created when we made the when we set those up in the rendering chapter. So with those all selected, I can then press the play button. That's going to ask me if I want to save the changes. I'm going to press no. I'm just double checking that I have saved this. I'm going to press no. And that's just going to churn through and render each of those angles. You can see these have been saved in the folder where I've saved my render file. Let's have a look at these resulting renders. So you can see by doing it this way that we can get a consistent render set every time.